Hey, Lewis.
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. You could hear me all right and everything?
Yeah, should be fine. Let me just see if I um yeah, is my microphone coming out all right? I've got
Yeah, no, it is. I got new headphones, which is why I was like a little neurotic about it.
That's all right, no problem. No
Yeah.
worries at all. How you doing?
Good. Do we have anyone else that we're waiting on, or could we just go ahead and get started?
I think it's just me today, yeah.
All right. Nice. Well, welcome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. And where are you located at the moment?
North London.
North London. Were you guys always in London, or were you originally from somewhere up a little further north?
Yeah, so we're all kind of from Cambridge, apart from Georgia, who's from Cornwall. But we met Georgia
Gotcha.
in London. But yeah, it's kind of the natural transition to go when you live in Cambridge to go and live in London. So
Gotcha.
we went
Yeah.
to uni there and studied there.
Yeah. And a few of you are actually still actively in school too, right?
Yeah, there's one, two, three, four of us who are still in uni.
Yeah.
So yes, one Isaac's doing electronic music at Guildhall School of Music, where me and Georgia finished at last year. May is doing classical piano at Guildhall School of Music. Luke is doing English literature at Goldsmiths in South London, and Charlie is doing ancient history at King's College
Okay.
London. Yeah.
Okay. Any specific kind of ancient history? Do you know?
Yeah, Greek stuff. He always talks about Greeks. I think.
Greek stuff. Okay. That's good to know. And you were also in that electronic music program?
No, I was doing the jazz course at Guildhall
Ah,
with
gotcha.
Georgia as well. Yeah,
Yeah. What kind of jazz did you focus on, or was there focus?
it was all pretty traditional, to be honest. The weirdest we got was like Kenny Wheeler, I guess, which is not particularly weird, but I mean, it was like yeah, pretty traditional course, um, which is good in some ways and not good in other ways. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that occurred to me, especially listening to the album, and I'm a huge fan of it, is that there are these kind of the influences. They seem fairly eclectic, for lack of a better word. And despite that, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's this hodgepodge of ideas. That it is more along the lines of like a pastiche or something like that. And I was wondering, is there some sort of guiding ethos or like North Star the band has that lets you incorporate all these disparate ideas without kind of losing sight of what you're trying to accomplish?
yeah. I guess that comes from everyone having really different musical backgrounds and really different tastes. And there's seven of us in the band, so it means that there's so many voices that can be heard if you want to hear them. So there's kind of no point in silencing certain people because we all have really strong and defined musical backgrounds. So we play to that massively. Everyone's involved in the writing of their own parts, if not for overall structural stuff as well. So yeah, it's really about the kind of shared creativity that we have. I think that helps
Gotcha.
eclectic sound.
Yeah, and actually, I think one of my favorite lines that I've read in a music review in the last like couple of years is one in the Guardian about one of your live shows, and they just opened with, "There are apparently seven people on stage making what sounds like Eastern Mediterranean rave music," and like as a fan of your band, I was just like, "That's like is that a fair characterization?"
Yeah, I mean, I guess that comes from the kind of more the klezmer elements of our music. There's a lot of Georgia and I have played a lot of klezmer music in our in the past, and so that massively comes through in our language. So it you can hear that in the tunes, and yeah, and it's great music, party
Yeah,
music. So it's well, not always party music, but it's very vibrant, exciting music. So yeah, it also kind of naturally goes in, like it naturally crosses over with rock really well, I find. Um,
hmm,
and yeah, that's definitely part of that Eastern. What did
yeah,
you say it
yeah.
was?
They said it was Eastern Mediterranean rave music, or what sounded like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's like jazz or it's klezmer, when you're like usually latching onto something, is it kind of like, oh, this might be a good idea or rhythm to play around with and bring to the band? Or is it less academic and it's just more the fact that you have these backgrounds and when you put in a room together, it kind of comes about organically?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit more organic than that. We don't think like here's what this here's what we want this section to achieve musically. I'm sorry, no, we don't think of something and be like, here's what we want to play. We think here's what we want to achieve from this section. So it might be like we might be pining for a little bit of a something more tense, or really wanting something that's a bit less tense, or a bit
Mm,
sad, or a bit happy at that point. So we have the skills and the tools to be able to write stuff around those around those kind of briefs. But it's not so much about intellectualizing it so much, because we've got a really like quite a massive split in the band between classically trained players and very not classically trained players. So there's no point in intellectualizing it from the classically trained background, because people they're not going to understand that. And what is good about the band is the fact that we have this cross in this rift in musical upbringings, because you've got the guys who are the bedroom rock stars of the band. They can like they can say, nah, that just sounds too like complicated, that sounds stupid, when it could be something that we think sounds great but might just be too complex for no reason. And it's really good to be able to have people kind of on both sides of the fence, really.
yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging to hear because I do think that like when those moments do come up in the music, you could almost imagine like the rehearsal space, and it's a much different visual if like you're all standing around in a circle. It's like, all right, let's do klezmer jam in B minor versus like you're just playing and then someone happens to bring some sort of motif or riff or something, and then like you guys just kind of lock in and go off to the races.
Yeah, that's more about we're not actually like we're not really a jamming band. We don't really jam to work out material. We have done for a couple of songs, but the majority of it will start off as a skeleton from someone's mind and then come into a rehearsal room, and we'll pad it all out. Everyone will write their own parts. Everyone will kind of assist on structural stuff, assist on each other's parts, and like it becomes a bit more of a creative free for all once the skeleton of a track has been created, I'd say.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you guys had released a couple singles and then I think re-recorded them for the album. What was the reason behind that?
Well, firstly, they needed to be all recorded in the same room at the same time, because that was the point of the album, was that it was like a live recording, almost as if it could pass for a live session album. And we really wanted that. We wanted to capture that live vibe. So it wouldn't be right if we used the old recordings. It would just they would sit weirdly on the album. But also we wanted to change them up because we were a bit bored of them. To be fair,
Mm,
we've been playing them for ages, and every single time we had like a filmed video or something, or like there was something that was going to go up online, we could only play those two songs really, because they were the only two songs we had out. So we were just really sick of playing them like that, and it's understandable that people were a bit annoyed that we ditched them, but at the same time, like, we're doing this because we enjoy it, and if we're not going to enjoy playing those tunes like they were, we were going to re-record them.
yeah.
It was less about it was yeah, it was just about like keeping a bit of longevity in the songs, really, because
Hmm.
they get boring when you play them over and over again. We had to change it up a bit, you know.
Yeah. And like, I think I was definitely in the camp that I initially liked the earlier versions better, but I think that's really just because I was accustomed to hearing those versions, and the more I've listened to the album, because it does come through like there's a slightly different mix. I do feel like the drums come through a lot cleaner. There's like some lyrical changes too.
Mm.
So it isn't one of these cases where I'm like, I like this one better than that one. It's more like they do feel sufficiently different despite being the same song.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's kind of the point, really. That's what we wanted, because there you can still find the old ones, but yeah, and also people just like what they get used to. There's a whole
Right.
like army of people out there who prefer our versions that they've got bootlegged of us playing live to the ones that are on the albums, which is just ridiculous, because like they're not going to be as good. but they're used to them, so they find them better, and that's fair enough. Like I would probably be a bit peeved as well if my band, a band that I liked, had changed around the songs a bit compared to the one that I really liked, you know. But I mean, people get used to it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Speaking of people latching on to something that's familiar to them, this is an idea that I'm kind of working through. But I think one of the things that your band does really well is that you can create something, and this is in the context of the fact that, like, if you think of someone like Max Martin or anybody that makes like some sort of pop song that's kind of immediately palatable to people because it is familiar because of chord changes or just like some of the musical cues. Whereas your band, I feel like, does create something that is kind of wholly unfamiliar, but is still immediate in its reception, at least to my mind. And I feel like that's a testament to your craft and being able to create something like that while also being able to kind of like capably guide the listener to something that is wholly new and kind of unpredictable, but still, like satisfying. And I don't really have a question about that as much as that. It's just something I was thinking about last night, gearing up to speak to you.
Yeah, well, I feel like I think there's a lot of wicked pop music out at the moment, and there is something very comforting about that immediacy of stuff you recognize. But at the same time, like the general listener, like 100 years ago, was listening to Benjamin Britten, stuff like that, was listening to like strange neoclassical music or like kind of modern contemporary music, and this is like I don't think the general listener is dumbed down any. To be honest, I think anyone can get into any kind of music if they come at it from the right angle and if they give it the right, um, if they're in the right situation to listen to it in, and if they want to enjoy it. So I think yeah we've I guess it's more appealing when a bunch of young kids do it because it's like, oh right, there, that's kind of cute. I don't know, like maybe they think like, oh right, well, like if these kids are doing it, then maybe it is cool and they'll listen to it. Not that we're particularly cool, but if you know what I mean, like people,
Right.
I don't really know what I'm talking about.
No, but I get what you're saying because I feel like that is kind of the ethos for why I created my radio show, and is that I wanted to create not a space, but we were talking about some sort of format that allows music that isn't necessarily like radio friendly according to like the usual FM standards or commercial standards that doesn't make it as easily dismissible for when people hear and they go, wow, it doesn't really sound like something I'd be interested in. But it's like, no, well, if you sit with it in the right headspace, there actually could be a lot there that you would latch onto. And thinking about your background in jazz, I feel like that's another genre that like feels totally unaccessible to a lot of people. So I'm wondering, like, how did you get into jazz, and is there any sort of like gateway that you'd point people towards?
Definitely. I got into jazz uh, quite slowly. My dad really liked jazz. My dad listens to jazz quite a lot, but not that much. It was more I attended a music course and called the Albury Young Musicians it was in Suffolk in a nice uh, countryside county about like 2 hours away from London, and there were a lot of like older kids who were like probably like 3 years older than me, 2 years older than me that were playing jazz that I always thought were really cool. And I was like, oh, I want to kind of do that. I want to do that. But I was kind of always doing classical music, and I was never really felt good enough at jazz, and kind of still don't. But they were very inspiring to me, I guess. And we had tutors that would come in, and I kind of knew like that's kind of what I want to do. And so I then went to Guildhall and did jazz, learned a fair bit, but probably wasn't the course for me really. I kind of would have liked to learn it in my own terms more, because I was quite inspired by these guys who were pretty like they were quite advanced,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of not necessarily just doing trad stuff. I think the trad stuff is great, but it wasn't quite what I wanted from it. But that being said, I'm practicing so much bebop and stuff at the moment. So like, who knows? But I'm just doing it at my own speed. I'm doing it. I think the reason why jazz feels so alienating is there's a shitload of jazz gatekeepers out there who want you to understand jazz in order to listen to it, and it can, I think it can just be really alienating for someone getting into it for the first time. I think the whole I haven't seen La La Land, but I've seen a clip from it when they're like, look at all these people here, they're not even listening to the jazz.
Yeah.
Like, who cares? Just if you enjoy talking over it, then talk over it. If you enjoy listening to it, then listen to it. But I mean, it's that whole like, people need to be paying so much attention and understanding music to get it. They don't. They need to. It can make you feel something without like understanding it. And a lot of these people who are the gatekeepers of this music it's just not their music at all. Like, jazz is so much more than just like music to be understood. Jazz was like one of the most culturally important musics that has ever existed, I think. Anyway, I mean, the civil rights movement in the 60s, like that is a music of like reclaiming people's heritage. It's not a music for you to be saying you've got to understand it to like it. It's a music about passion and belonging. And so yeah, that's the reason, for me at least, why I've ever been alienated by it, and why I think a lot of people I know feel alienated by it. But in terms of a gateway to getting into jazz at the moment, I mean, there's so much good jazz happening nowadays. It feels like a weird thing to say, good jazz, but
Yeah.
So many amazing jazz musicians coming out of London, especially Nubaya Garcia, Joe Armand Jones, Ezra Collective, Sons of Kemet, all of these guys that are kind of, what's Shabaka Hutchins' band? What's it called? Comet is Coming. They're great. There's just so much to sink your teeth into at the moment that's coming up. Moses Boyd as well, in London, and then obviously like you've got Kamasi Washington on the other side of the pond.
Yeah.
Just setting off into space at the moment. He's amazing. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff out there at the moment that feels to me is a lot more inclusive than the way that people have been treating. I mean, like I've been to a couple of gigs of these guys in the South London bands, and there's people like dancing and shouting and hugging each other while they're playing. It's like, that's just great. It's what like kind of it's a very non-alienating musical experience, and it's just awesome vibes over there. It's really good.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent kind of segue to start closing on, because I think that's very well said, and it resonates deeply with me. At pre-pandemic, did you guys have the chance to tour the U.S. at all?
No, never been. I've never been to the U.S. in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, love to go.
I would love to have you guys here.
hopefully next year, hopefully. But
gotcha.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, Lewis, thanks so much for coming on. It was great talking to you. I really do love the album, and thank you for that on Jazz.